Hello and a very, very good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on which part of the world you're checking in from. Wishing you all a very, very happy new year. Thank you so much for taking time to be part of today's AD Self-Service Plus webinar. I hope you're all having a great day so far. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is Sharda Murthy. I work with the marketing team of Manage Engine. I'm a technical expert in AD Self-Service Plus, and I will be your presenter for the day. Before I jump into today's session, I would like to do a very, very quick audio and video check. So if you can hear me loud and clear, and if there is no issues in viewing the screen, please drop in a yes message in the chat box provided. I'm going to wait in for a couple of confirmations before I proceed further with today's session. If you can hear me loud and clear, and if there are no issues in viewing the screen, please take a couple of seconds to drop in a yes message in the chat box provided. All right, thank you. Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the confirmations we've received so far. All right, with no further ado, I'm going to quickly jump into the session plan for the day. But first things first, I'm still working from home. I am working remotely. I have connected to my home network. So in case there are any technical glitches, if you cannot hear my audio loud and clear, if there's issues with the screen, the broadcast in general, please keep me notified by dropping a message in the chat box. You can communicate with me in the chat box. The reason why I've put this across is because Zoom, unfortunately, does not have an audience view for the presenter. So I wouldn't know if the broadcast is seamless unless I receive a message from you. So in case of any technical glitches, please keep me notified by dropping a message in the chat box. That said, this session is being recorded. It's being recorded live, and a copy will reach your inbox once we wrap up and we are able to process the recording as well. So in case you are on a tight schedule, in case you will have to disconnect the session, all you need to do is drop in a message before you do so, so I can ensure that a copy of today's recording reaches your inbox. So I wanted to put that across as well. And I would love for it to be an interactive session. I would love to take time to answer your questions. So if you do have any, please keep them coming by dropping your message specifically in the Q&A tab, dropping in your questions in the Q&A tab. The reason being, I will be able to answer your questions live. I will also be able to take time to answer your questions offline in case I've missed out on any. So those are the checkpoints that I have that I wanted to pass on to you before I move further into today's session. So yes, we will be talking about improved password security in the times of remote working. We have been focusing on password security pretty much for the last two to 3 years as an organization, as a product development team from the product development perspective as well. And we've constantly worked on improving the security posture when it comes to Active Directory password management or hybrid identity password management. And I'm going to pass on certain tips and tricks that I think is important and necessary for every single administrator, depending on, irrespective of which part of the world you're checking in from, to have these security checkpoints, security points checked, or more importantly, ensure that these measures are taken on an organizational level in your organization as well. But just out of curiosity, I have a very quick poll for all of you who have joined me today. I would like to know how many of you are existing customers of AD Self-Service Plus. Have you made use of the application? Do you have any experience of working with the application? If yes, please let me know by dropping in a message, dropping in your poll answers. If not, you can definitely let us know if you are here for the information side of things and completely skip the poll. This is just to understand my audience better and thereby also customize the session to meet your needs. So I can try and answer all your questions or customize the session for your requirements. So I'm just going to leave that for a couple of more seconds before I proceed further with today's session. Great. All right. Perfect. All right. Thank you so much for taking time to answer the poll. I will bring back the poll later in the session as well. But right now, we are nearly at 80-20, with 80% of you having no prior experience of working with AD Self-Service Plus. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly pass on a demo link for you to work with. But yes, new times, new norms. In fact, we're still at changing times in most parts of the world. I'm not sure where you are checking in from, but I'm currently checking in from India, and we are slowly resuming office working as well. Most of us are still working from home. We are slowly transitioning to, a hybrid environment, even when it comes to working remotely. So yes, new times, changing times with the onset of this year as well. So I'm going to once again touch upon the important aspects that you need to keep a tab on when you approach hybrid identity password management. And I will be talking about the native Active Directory password policy, why it is not enough. I will also be talking about implementing conditional access based on risk factors. This is because of what we've been pushed into in the last couple of decades, the cybersecurity attacks, to be more specific. And also talking about defending the network, protecting your remote workforce by protecting VPN itself. This is the agenda proposed in front of me today. I'm going to quickly jump to the AD Self-Service Plus setup that I have here. I am working remotely, so I have taken a remote desktop connection to the server setup that I have at work. But for every one of you, you will be able to access the demo link that I'm going to pass on in the chat box for you. Please let me know if you have trouble in accessing the link. Pretty straightforward. You just have to click on the administrative logon. It's a live actionable 24/7 demo. So you will be able to work with it even after today's session. You will be able to walk through the entire application. Since I will be talking about AD Self-Service Plus today, since I will be achieving the agenda with this application, in case you'd like to walk through, take a walk through along with me, please feel free to do so. You will be able to work around with the application from the demo console that I've passed on to you. And yes, first things first, I have taken a remote desktop connection to the server that's physically available at my workplace, and I'm working with AD. So what I've done in the backend is I've created a container, I've created an organizational unit under my name, and I've tried to sort users into each of these OUs, trying to replicate a simple organization. So I have admin, finance, marketing, I have users in each of these OUs, right? And this is my basic setup. This is all I've done in terms of end users. What I plan to do now is work with different levels of permissions, different levels of access for these users based on policies that I'm going to build within AD Self-Service Plus. Yes, I can definitely share the recordings after the webinar. Thank you so much. I'm going to skip pronouncing names because I'm not sure I might get it right. So please pardon me if I don't say your name, but yes, I'm reading your messages and reading your questions as well. Thank you. Let me log into AD Self-Service Plus right here. And what I've done in the backend before I logged in is I have created the basic configuration. All right, so I started by configuring my domain. I'm working with one single domain today. I'm working with a test setup, a workshop setup, but in real time, you will be able to work with multiple domains if that's the setup that you use in your organization. And I've also set it as the default domain. Let me jump to the configuration tab right here. I have built self-service policies. What I mean by self-service policies with respect to AD Self-Service Plus is basically how I would like to delegate permissions to end users within the organization, or how I would like to control access for user groups within the organization. So as you can see, I have simply replicated what I had in my AD right here. All I did is replicate the policy right here. I've skipped test users because I created this for testing purposes, bulk user provisioning, but I have all the other policies right here. And it's pretty straightforward. You can go about and add as many policies as you want. You can choose to, you can choose to pick the permission that you'd like to delegate to users in your organization. You can also select users based on containers, based on groups, across multiple domains as well. You can choose to skip the child OUs as well. So right now I have all the policies that I require right here with different permission level as well. So I have different self-service permissions delegated to different self-service users in my organization. And throughout today's session, I'm going to work with these user groups. I'm going to give different permissions. I'm going to customize different policies, different password policies based on these user groups. All right. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to drop in your questions in the Q&A tab. I would love to customize the session to meet your needs, to answer your questions. That's what I'm here for. So please feel free to drop in your questions if you have any. If you also require customization, you can let me know by dropping in your messages in the chat box. So first things first, I will be addressing the most critical aspect of having a better security posture when it comes to passwords, which is having a good password policy in place. I'm sure you will all agree with me, but let me tell you what the problem with the native Active Directory password policy is. It's pretty straightforward, right? It is universal, but the problem is that the password policy, the native Windows Active Directory password policy, has not seen any drastic change in over 2 decades. I'm talking about a password policy that was built in late 1990s, all right? And yes, there were GPOs introduced. Yes, there were fine-grained password policies introduced in 2000s and late 2000s. But my question is, if you as an end user still try to enter your username, your organization name, or certain other predictable patterns as your native Windows Active Directory password policy, as your native Windows Active Directory password, is it still acceptable on an organizational level with all the security threats that we are facing as a global audience, right? This is a question that I want you to think about, I want you to ponder on, and that brings me to having a better password policy in place, the importance of having a better password policy in place. Once again, as you see, I already have a custom granular password policy enforced for the test accounts that I'm working with, all right? I have about 2 different password policies that I've enforced. The advantage of these password policies is that pretty much every single week predictable patterns and passwords can be prevented, can be restricted. You can stop users from setting these passwords. The good news is you can also restrict old passwords. You can restrict characters from the old passwords, characters from usernames. And these are just some of the complexity rules that I'm going to walk you through today. But more importantly, to give you a better sense of why we need a better password policy in place, especially while dealing with the native Active Directory password policy, is what I'm going to explain right now. All right. Let me walk you through the different password-based cybersecurity attacks, password-based hacks or attacks that you can prevent with just upgrading your native Windows Active Directory password policy. With the password policy that I have right now for the administrative console, I have a minimum password length, all right? I'm disallowing repetition. I can choose to disallow old password attack, which is password history-based attack. I am definitely working with incremental attacks because I can also restrict characters from the old password. I have restricted the entire dictionary. I can choose to restrict custom dictionaries as well. We support multiple languages. You can also disallow patterns like qwerty, ASDF, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, days of the week, months of a calendar, organization name. Name any weak predictable pattern or password, enter it into the list right here, the comma separated value list, and you can definitely work with, or you can definitely prevent a big chunk of brute force attacks, pattern-based attacks, password history-based attacks. You can definitely prevent incremental attacks and a lot more. These are just a few that I want to talk about, right? And you can also choose to override all the complexity rules. If password length is over 20, if password length is over 15, 25, that's something that you can customize. That's something that you can pick. Once again, each and every password complexity that you see here, each and every password policy, custom password policy that you see here can be customized for different users based on different user groups. And that is great because you can have a more stringent password policy for critical accounts, privileged accounts, administrative accounts, and also an option to, pick certain complexities above all that is enabled for the other user accounts. Basically, have a more, or I wouldn't say a more easy password complexity rule because that would be wrong, but have a password complexity or have a password policy that is flexible for users in your organization. All right. And yes, with this done, what I want to talk about right now is not just being able to enable a custom granular password policy for your native Active Directory, but also enforcing the same for your on-premises and cloud applications as well, which is what I'm going to talk about right now. Let me quickly check if I have any questions. All right. I'm going to get back to your questions if it's not specific to password policy a little later in the session. But yes, if you have any questions about password policy, please do let me know. I have enabled this custom granular password policy across all my reset password and change password pages. So as a user, when I try to reset my password or change my password from my Gina CP console, my custom granular password policy is displayed right here. But what's interesting is I'm going to give in a weak password right now. And it's going to check almost all the complexity rules that you see on the screen, and yet will be rejected because it has a common word and a dictionary word. And if you were curious as to what my password was, it is one of the most commonly used predictable password, which is PASSWORD @123. Yes, it does check a big list of complexity rules, but it is still a weak predictable password. And this brings me to the concept of password entropy. When you have a password policy in place, it's not just about checking multiple boxes, right? It's not just about satisfying 20 complexity rules. It also makes it difficult for users to have a password that checks multiple complexity rules. Well, the number of complexity rules are more. What we're trying to achieve with the AD Self-Service Plus password policy is to have a balanced password policy that introduces complexity, but at the same time does not enforce complexity by compromising the susceptibility of a password, right? The susceptibility factor is what we call as password entropy, which has to be taken into consideration because password @123 might check multiple boxes, but is still a very weak password. So you need to have a password policy in place that does not compromise on the password entropy factor, that does not focus only on checking multiple boxes, and for which you need to enable or restrict patterns, dictionary words, and also have an option of working with really long passwords that are not so easy to crack. All right, that is all I have about password policy. I'm going to talk a bit more about it towards the end of the session, but if you do have any questions, please do let me know. I have one question that reads, how does Manage Engine integrate with Active Directory GPOs? So since we talk about AD Self-Service Plus specifically today, or since we speak about password management, let me tell you that this password policy that you have right here will only act as an additional layer over the GPO password policy that you have. If that is your question, the straightforward answer is that this password policy will be a layer above your GPO. So we are not compromising your GPO password complexity rules. If you have a password history or a certain password length that you have enforced from your GPO password policy, that will remain enforced, but users will also have to satisfy this particular password policy that you have enforced. To put it in even simpler words, let's say if your minimum password length is 8, you cannot set a minimum password length of 7 or 6 with the AD self-service plus password policy, but you can definitely enforce a password policy, a password length of 10, which is a step above or a layer above your native Active Directory password policy, as well as your GPO password policy. Thank you so much for that question. If you do have any more questions about password policies, do let me know. I'm going to take a couple of seconds to see if we have any more questions. All right, I'm going to quickly take time to answer this question that I have. Once again, please pardon me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but it's from Tirayut, I believe. Once again, sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. The question that Tirayut has is about user licensing. And he says he's an existing customer of AD Self-Service Plus. The number of licensing they have is limited, and they need to keep moving user accounts because of the inactive non-enrolled students and passed on to students who are new. So I believe that you're working with an educational setup. You're working with students. I believe that you either work with the education domain or you're from a college or university. So yes, we do have reports that help you with this. I'm going to quickly walk you through the reports real quick. So jumping to the reports tab, I'm going to take this in 3 different ways. One is to be able to identify inactive users. So being able to identify inactive users from a password management perspective is to look at users whose passwords have already expired, or look at users whose passwords is soon to expire. All right. So usually password expired users is what I would consider as inactive users. You can choose to exclude certain users like disabled users or smart card users. Click to generate. And you might find users who've been part of the organization but have been inactive for over 6 months, or let's say over 1 educational term, right? And then choose to remove these users from the AD Self-Service Plus enrollment report. So talking about enrollment is basically the process of signing up with different authenticators. That is also the process that we identify as licensed users as well, all right? So if you have a bunch of users right here, you can choose to generate and export this report, jump to the enrollment report, identified licensed users, and choose to disenroll these users, choose to remove their licenses, revoke their licenses. Or if you do not want to remove or revoke their licenses, you can choose to disenroll these users as well. So pick the users that you like to disenroll, hit this button, and they will be automatically revoked from the particular authenticators that they have signed up with. All right, so this is one way in which you will be able to work with or identify inactive users in your organization, inactive student accounts in your organization, identify their licenses, identify their enrollment options, pick the enrolled users, choose to disenroll these users as well. So let's say I'm going to disenroll Syra and Gray right now, because they have been inactive since a couple of months. All I have to do is hit disenroll and I'm good to go. I'm doing this live, and that is because I'm working with test user accounts, but I would like you to have a check on this if you're doing it manually, just to ensure the right person is disenrolled. That's as simple as that. So these users will not be able to enjoy the benefits of password self-service right now. I really hope that answers your question. If you have more questions, if you'd like to discuss on this particular process, or if you'd like to automate this process as well, please write to me on my email ID, and I would love to assist you in that process as well. But within the scope of AD Self-Service Plus, this is the best option that you have to identify these users, to revoke their licenses, and also to disenroll these users. Thank you so much for your question. All right, I'm going to quickly move on to our configuration tab right here to talk more about enrollment. Since I've already touched upon the topic, I want to talk about the different authentication options that we have. So once again, since the first layer of defense has been taken care of, which is your native Windows Active Directory password policy, extremely critical to upgrade your password policy. I would advise you to try and have a minimum level of advanced password policy in place. Disallow weak predictable patterns. Ensure every single user account in your organization is secure. You can also check out the Manage Engine Active Directory free tools to revisit your password policy and to make changes. I will pass on the link to the free tools real soon. But yes, these are the different authenticators that we support, and it's important to have an additional layer of authentication, especially while we are working remotely. But today I'm going to specifically talk about enforcing multi-factor authentication for VPN logons, because remote working is definitely called in for us to tether into our network remotely with VPNs, and it's important to have a secure VPN connection in place. I'm going to quickly check if my server is up and running because I had trouble previously. I have a cloud hosted setup right here and I had trouble connecting. So I'm going to check if the server is up and running, else I will walk you through how this works verbally. So I'm going to wait for the connection to take place. All right. And I will also walk you through what I've done in the backend. So once again, you can customize different authenticators for different policies right here. I'm specifically talking about AD Self-Service Plus because this is the application I'm working with today. But I would definitely urge you to have a minimum of one additional factor of authentication for users in your organization across different password checkpoints, across different logons as well. With AD Self-Service Plus, you can enable this for the password self-service actions. You can enable this for the AD Self-Service Plus logon. You can also choose to enable this for all your endpoints and VPN. Specifically talking about VPN today, all you need to do is pick how many factors of authentication you require. All right, that's bad. Pick the authenticator that you'd like to work with. I have a configuration up and running on the cloud, but I am unfortunately not able to connect to the server today because I think it is down and it's pretty early in the morning in India today. So I could not get it up and running. It's physically available at my workplace. So really sorry about this. But what would have happened typically is when I try to establish a connection to my VPN, instead of connecting directly, I will have to verify my identity with a secondary factor of authentication. Let me quickly check if I can show you how this works. So I'm going to simply give an Adam and see if the secondary factor of authentication is triggered. All right. Let me do this again. Let me redo the configuration so I can show you how this works. I'm going to delete this profile, enter the URL, click next. The user I'm working with is Adam, given the password. Choose to import. I have a self-signed certificate as well. All right. Looks like the server is down and there's no way I am able to connect to it. I'm going to try it for one last time. Perfect. There are two reasons this could happen. One, my AWS setup, which is on the cloud, and that's where I've hosted both AD Self-Service Plus and my AD is down. That is one that is possible because it's a test setup. And two, the second possibility is that the password for this particular user has already expired. So the first factor of authentication, which is my AD native Active Directory password authentication, is not going through. So there are two reasons why this could potentially happen. So let's look at this as troubleshooting. I'm going to fix this, take a recording of this particular process, and I'm going to make sure that it reaches your inbox while you receive the material for this particular session. But coming back, you will be able to enable VPN MFA for with different authenticators. I had done it with Google Authenticator for my cloud instance. And what happens is your first factor of authentication is naturally your native Windows Active Directory password, following which you need to verify your identity with the secondary factor of authentication. So what I plan to do now is let me show you how this can work for an end user working remotely, trying to log into their Windows machine. So let me work with Sharda's account right now. I have MFA enabled for Windows logon as well for this particular user. And we have the security question answer method of authentication. What would usually happen is I would be able to seamlessly log in and access my Windows machine. But since I have an additional factor of authentication enabled, I can pick from different authenticators. Let me go with security question answer to keep it simple, answering my security questions. I'm going to click on continue. I will then have access to my Windows machine. And this is the same workflow while users try to connect to a VPN, while users try to connect to perform a password reset action, or try to log into the AD Self-Service Plus end user console as well. All right, I'm going to quickly do that as well. So let me log in as Sharda to AD Self-Service Plus. This is my end user portal. Click on login. And since I have my secondary factor of authentication enabled right here as well, I need to give in the answers. Once again, these factors of authentication can be customized. You can choose security questions, email-based verification, mobile app-based verification. All that the user has to do is log into their console, sign up with different authenticators that they like to work with. I have 4 authenticators that I've pre-configured. I can also choose biometrics like fingerprint and Face ID, set it up, work with it, and use these authenticators to verify user identity at different checkpoints. Once again, extremely critical while we're working with password resets. More importantly, talking about remote working, I feel it's extremely critical to have a secure login and access to VPN as well. And VPN-based attacks have drastically increased in 2020 with the onset of COVID, with the onset of wide, global level remote working. So it's important to secure your VPNs as well. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to enable multi-factor authentication at different checkpoints. If you have more questions about MFA, if you have more questions about what authenticators to enable, what could work best for users in your organization, I am more than happy to extend my support. I will pass on my mail ID at the end of today's session, and please feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to assist you more specifically to meet your organization's needs. That brings me to this particular change password console, where, like I mentioned earlier, you will be able to change password for your password synchronization enabled applications as well. In this particular case, I have password synchronization enabled for my hybrid identities, which is my Office 365 account. All right. So when I try to change my password for Office 365, I'm deliberately giving in a weak password, and it will be clearly rejected. I have characters from my username, I have characters from the restricted pattern list, and this will not only ensure that users are aware of the password complexity rules, users are also rest assured that with better complexity, their passwords can be secure. It does not have to be really long passwords. It does not have to be really complex passwords. They will be educated on the complexity rules that they need to meet, and at the same time, rest assured that their accounts are secure with additional factors of authentication and with a better password policy. So once again, highly, highly recommend having a better password policy in place, and also having multiple levels of authentication at different checkpoints, customizable based on your user needs. Moving on to the last topic that I would like to discuss for the day, which is risk factors, right? One of the biggest risk factor while working remotely is not being sure of who is accessing what resources from where, when, what time, And these factors are something that we consider critical. These factors are also deciding factors when it comes to providing access to users. And so last year, we introduced conditional access. Conditional access is basically the process in which you permit or restrict access or provide restricted access based on certain risk factors, based on certain conditions that a user account satisfies. So quickly jumping to conditional access right here. I do not have a setup up and running because I'm the administrator, I'm the marketer, I also belong to the finance team. I'm basically working with a test setup. So I did not want to have any trouble in logging in and accessing. I'm also constantly logging in from one device. I'm constantly logging in from one network. And so I will not be able to walk you through the live example of how conditional access works. But what typically happens is you can restrict access based on IP addresses. You can provide access based on IP addresses. It could also be an IP address range. All right. And if this does not work according to you, you can pick the computers that users are working with. I have about a bunch of machines that I work with, but it's always this particular machine that I'm working with. I only have one physical device, one physical computer. And you can also pick the platforms that users work with or restrict platforms that users work with. You can add multiple conditions, restrict based on business hours. If you work, let's say, between Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., you can restrict access beyond these business hours as well. Restrict access based on location. Right now, let's say I have users checking in only from India. So I can choose to do that. Pick a particular country. All right. And once the factors are decided, all I need to do is decide the policies that I'd like to associate this with. So let's say I provide conditional access to marketing and finance policies, marketing and finance OU that I have. And my criteria here is that it has to satisfy the business hours 3 and 4. All right. It has to be at stipulated business hours and from this particular location. If the location is not fetched, if that data is not available, the location that's mapped to the IP address will automatically be fetched. This is what happens in the backend. I click on update and I will then be able to enforce this particular conditional access for users belonging to marketing and finance. So if I have users in my organization who log in after 8 p.m. or before 8 a.m., then I will have to restrict them from this particular policy, because otherwise they will simply be denied access. Or if the risk factors are partially, if the conditions are partially satisfied, then they will be allowed limited access, or they will also have to work with increased or multiple levels of multi-factor authentication. So this is a basic workflow of how conditional access works. I'm really sorry about that. This is a basic workflow of how conditional access works. And with that, you will be able to customize different conditional access modules, or have different conditional access, different conditions, basically, for different users, different rules for different users in your organization, and also prevent any unexpected, unnecessary traffic or access that you potentially can get due to cybersecurity attacks or certain risk factors as well. So this is very critical, and this has worked well for us in my particular organization as well. I would more importantly like to talk about one particular case for my social media account. Yes, this is not business oriented, but I had access, I had notifications enabled for a particular social media account. And sometime in the month of April or May 2020, I had constant password reset triggers from an IP address that was detected in Mexico, all right? And this was happening at about 1 a.m. Indian time. And I woke up to about 20-25 password reset triggers for this particular social media account. So this has been happening all around us. There are multiple accounts that have been compromised, multiple business accounts that have been compromised as well. Organizations have been compromised. Twitter is one great example. There were phishing scams that happened around WHO. COVID is still one of the most widely used phishing scam even today. So it's important for you to ensure that the right person has right access to the right machine at the right time from the right place. And one of the easiest ways to restrict access or provide controlled access is with conditional access. So I did want to touch upon implementing conditional access for users in your organization as well. With that, I have almost come to the end of today's session. If you have more questions specific to password policy, hybrid identity management best practices, in general about all these, or more specific to ED Self-Service Plus, please feel free to drop in your questions. I'd be more than happy to spend the next couple of minutes to answer all your unanswered questions. I would be happy to assist you offline as well. So if you'd like to connect on call with me, if you'd like resources that help you with certain information, please drop in a message to shard@manageengine.com. I'm also going to quickly drop in my email address in the chat box for you. And as I promised, before I check out of today's session, I will pass on the free tool links for you. I am going to quickly pass on the weak password finder link because this is something that is in correlation with the session that we discussed today. If you are not ready to implement a better password policy yet, I think this will be a great reality check. Pretty straightforward, a single downloadable file. Pick the report that you'd like, enter your details, enter your domain details, hit generate, and be surprised to see the number of users who actually have a weak predictable password. And the bad news is that if the number is alarming, it's high time that you have a better password policy in place, because this is a basic check. This is a basic check against a big list of weak, predictable, compromisable passwords, and also a big list of passwords that have been leaked over the last decade. All right, so if you have users in your organization who have such passwords, who have passwords that belong to weak databases or simply weak predictable patterns, it's high time you step up and have a better password policy in place. All right. That said, there are also multiple other free tools that you can benefit from. If you'd like to explore more, you can also write to me. I'd be more than happy to assist you with the evaluation of the free tools as well. We would like to extend the free tools to all administrators across the world to help you have a better reporting in place, to give you a better management console, a GUI that you can work with while you're working with the native Active Directory, because I know for a fact that it's not very user-friendly. So please do feel free to share it with your fellow administrative friends as well. It's completely free, no expectations, no limitations. You will be able to enjoy the benefits of these free tools with no limitations. With that, I'm going to quickly wrap up the session for the day and take time to answer your questions offline. I am also pressed for time, so I'm going to take time to answer your questions offline. If you do have any questions, if you have any comments, suggestions, ideas, please feel free to drop in your messages to me. I'd be more than happy to receive your feedback. I also have the session feedback for you on the screen. If you'd like to rate today's session based on your overall expectations, if you'd like to rate me on as a presenter on a scale of 1 to 5, please feel free to go ahead and fill in the session feedback before you check out of today's session. That said, once again, this entire session has been recorded and has been recorded live. So if you have if you require the recording earlier, or if you'd like us to pass this on to multiple other people in your organization, you can drop in a mail to me. I'd be more than happy to extend the resources to your friends, your colleagues, and you will also be receiving a copy via email in the next couple of days. With that, I'm going to wrap up the session for the day. Thank you so much for being a wonderful audience. I really hope this session was informative. I really hope that you will be able to apply certain password policy best practices for users in your organization, password-based practices for users in your organization. And on that note, I just want to quickly put this thought across. I wish, hope, and pray that you, your friends, your family, your near and dear are blessed with great health and happiness. Let's hope that this year brings us a lot of joy, health, and happiness. And please stay safe. Please take great care of yourself. And on that note, this is Sharda Murthy from the marketing team of Manage Engine, signing off for the day. Looking forward to seeing you in my upcoming webinars, workshops, and hopefully in the near future in your country or mine. Until then, namaste.